Hello, fellow bassists. George Mesa here for the Bass Player University. And today's episode is going to be something a little different. And for some of you, perhaps it'll be something of an eye-opener in a good way. And that's exactly what the point of the Bass Player University is. But this is more of a very specific thing. This is definitely not, based on the thumbnail, this is certainly not a history of metal. There's a time and a place for that, and it is not today. But this is more about what playing metal and what having the attitude for it can give you as a bass player, not because you have to go and play metal. I teach the blues all the time in class, one-on-one lessons and the Bass University for decades, not with the intention of a musician becoming a blues musician. I show musicians walking bass, from jazz, obviously, or maybe it's not obvious. Again, Bass Player University. But we learn these things so that we can understand them and utilize them and to embody the spirit of them. Because you need to try different styles in order to be comfortable in any style and to be better at what you normally do. A lot of people do stick to one or two genres tops. It's totally fine. But if you're doing a cover band, a wedding band, a top 40 band, you probably need a very good handle, a very good understanding of most styles, most feels. Doesn't mean you're going to do jazz, but knowing that stuff will always make you a better musician. So what do people think of when they hear the word metal? Meanwhile, it's a very, very deeply layered word. It certainly has a lot of meaning nowadays. But I think a lot of people think of this, unfortunately. And man, do they not look like man. Some people get offended almost immediately in a religious way. Like, get your devil music away from me. Now, that could have been Elvis back in the day. That could have been punk rock. But now it's metal. It's fine if it's in a movie soundtrack or on a TV show. But otherwise, turn it off. Get it out of my car. I think the category, maybe if it's even a label of like gangster rap, if that's even a label at this point, having, pretty rough lyrics, along with things like death metal and other types of metal that go pretty far. I think it's just as offensive, but the music isn't as abrasive. So I think that maybe the sound has something to do with it, right? Now, you don't have to be a music snob. I don't know what this image is, I just threw it in there. You don't have to be some music snob either, because somebody likes something and you don't, or vice versa. But there's some metal musicians now and in the past that would make Jocko proud in more ways than one. There's a lot to be learned. There's a lot to check out in the world of metal. If you even want to call it metal at this point, it's branched off into so many different things that it's hard to label. A guy like me can answer a few questions about it, but there's more experienced people for that. So what does it have to do with bass playing? And why are we discussing it here? Well, something I want to mention before answering that is this, I don't want to say it's a fear, but there happens to be a tendency of people that start with classical, people that start at a very studious, educated level, musically speaking, growing up with jazz and classical in particular, let's say. Let's say they even went to college for classical music. They've never touched metal. They've barely heard any of it, which is totally fine, by the way. There's plenty of stuff I haven't heard, too. The world is very vast, and there's a lot of music out there. But it's not that they are unable to. They're just not willing. They're not willing to try. And if they get the music on paper, let's say. Let's say I hand a classically trained musician a sheet of metal music. A sheet of metal music. That sounded very interesting. And this is not for everybody, because there are many exceptions to this. Most musicians that take the time to study and put their heart into it are pretty fantastic. But a lot of them can't duplicate the energy, the feel, the gesture, as it may be called classically, just to use a classical term. It is not coming from the right place. The notes are right. They're played in time. Absolutely does not work. Trash. Out the window. Get the next bass player in here. This guy can't record this album. It doesn't work. And a lot of times I've heard several jazzier musicians record metal, and it pulls it into a different territory. It almost immediately becomes more of a fusion, a jazz fusion sound. It could be something as simple as this. Let's just say typical rock thing, or maybe even disco funk. Or maybe right? Soft tone, control, simple, light touch. Now we get into rock territory. Hitting a little harder, giving it the pulse. Now let's put a little more edge on it. Now it fits the bill. The drummer's hitting real hard. That's the nature of the business. That's metal. And I have a lot of metal experience in my life. And anyone that's played metal with me, you know who you are if you're watching. Thank you. Because I got an edge on the metal scene where I grew up in Long Island, New York. I was pretty young. And the person I was jamming with, his older brother, had some older friends that were playing some thrash metal. Essentially thrash metal. It was a lot more progressive than that. I called it progressive thrash metal at the time. Or maybe I called it rhythmic progressive metal. I tried to put a fancy name on it. And, it pushed me immediately. I had to play faster, I had to play more accurately, I had to play with more attitude, I had to play with more energy, and do that for a long show. And we had lots of songs. It was great. But you saw the difference. Not only was I hitting harder, and sometimes I give myself a 2-1, which I know is a little unorthodox, but I get a hitter, and then I get something to follow through. You'll notice I'm doing this as well. I like to hit the same part of the string. If you're doing this, now it doesn't sound that far off. But I find to get more accuracy and more of a generally well-rounded tone if I pull this way. Now, speaking of pulling, at the very end and sometime else, you may have noticed, I actually pop the open E string. I'm popping it as if I was doing slap. This is heavy. It works. It definitely works. So just having played this small example, I want you to see that it is very possible to play the same exact bass line completely differently. Now, we're not even getting into, again, the history of metal. We're not even getting into how similar to classical a lot of metal is, especially nowadays, where all the styles of the world have been injected into this art form, and it is an art form. It has bridged the gap from almost all styles. There are bands that mixed too many styles to count in one album. Candiria, for example, putting hip-hop, Latin sounds, reggae, all in one album, flowing relatively effortlessly. It doesn't mean it was perfect, but it's been done, and that was I'm thinking of something from the 90s right now. So it's been done, and not exposing yourself to it on purpose, it's kind of silly. If you missed the boat, if it wasn't in your time, if you're older, younger than metal, particularly 80s, 90s, maybe early 2000s, then you missed it. No big deal. But don't avoid it willingly. Give it a chance. There are absolutely amazing players littered throughout the history of metal that are well regarded, as a matter of fact, especially in the bass community. But even that band that I first showed, the hair metal band, I think it was Cinderella. I'm not sure. It seems like it was. But man, these guys can play. But look at what they had to do to get themselves noticed. Little too much, perhaps. Metal gets noticed no matter what. And I mean, it was in Ace Ventura, right? Cannibal Corpse was in there. No problem when it's there. Otherwise, get it off my radio. We don't play that kind of music in this house. It's not a good idea to avoid it if you're avoiding it on purpose, or if you really just never had the chance to give it a shot. Go listen to some. Go listen to some metal. Forget about the singer. Tell me Meshuggah doesn't impress you. Go listen to Roots from, this is not this album, by the way. Go listen to Roots from Sepultura. Potentially one of the most important metal albums of all time. In my humble opinion. Go listen to Death with Steve DiGiorgio on fretless bass. Unbelievable. Iron Maiden with Steve Harris, I think a lot of people will agree on that one. Now, they're not as brutally heavy as some of the other stuff, but I think your ears should hear it. I think you should get that vibe to be available from within if you need it. I use it. I was doing an awesome jazz gig with Morris Goldberg. Thank you, Bakiti, for that one. And Morris, if you're out there, please say hi. I haven't heard from you in so long. We were doing some excellent stuff. He had his own brand of jazz called Safro Jazz, South African jazz. And man, that guy was ear candy to listen to. Incredible player. Just so amazing. I was so lucky to be with him. And when it was time to solo, and bassists don't solo every single time in jazz. That's not the way it is. But he gave me lots of solo time. It was very nice. And sometimes I would hit pretty hard if I felt it. I invoked the metal. And some of the crowd members were really into it because it was a fresh approach to something. It was my fusion at the moment. All of this is coming up in this episode to bring a point, is that in the university, one of the things that we do is I give about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different tracks to choose from so that each person can choose one to either play a section of or play the whole thing, and you have the whole month to get that song ready and get it as ready as you possibly can. One of the things I grade in the performance is authenticity. If you choose a metal track and you're playing it like this, whatever it happens to be, I'm just messing around. But if you play a fast line like that, super light and weird, it's not metal. It doesn't work that way. You have to hit hard. You have to play it the way it's meant to be played. Now, that's a pretty cheap line. I'm just doing E minor stuff. No big deal. But it's not about the notes. It's about the hitting. It's about the accuracy. It's about the feel and the gesture and the authenticity. Metal can give you an edge. Metal can give you an edge over a lot of other players. Metal is something that some people can't do. They can't do it right. They can't do it properly, I should say. And it's probably because they never did. It's not because they can't. They just right now can't. And if they gave it some time, they would enjoy it. It's fun to play this way. It's fun to adjust your amp and find the right settings for this. If you never have, I hope that I'm making it enticing for you, even though I'm playing not playing that much right now. It's really interesting to me how many metal musicians branch off to find their way with other styles very successfully, and how often people who have never tried metal fall flat on their face the first time they do it. And it's not about the speed or anything. It's just about the authenticity. It's not there. They don't have it. So not all metal bands are screaming and talking about death and violence. Not all metal bands are turned up to 11. There's so much variety in this field. that I really do think there's something for everybody. So a lot of you listening probably already do know, at least that the players are good. But go check it out. Go find something. Branch out. Develop some new sensibilities for some new styles. Try to play it. You can at least respect it from a playing standpoint. Even some of the less, really heady, well thought out metal, the stuff that's closer to rock punk, even some of that, can you play an entire show of it? That's a stamina thing we're talking about now. A lot of players that come to me want more speed. Sometimes overplaying and trying to make this style happen can push you to have to do it. And then eventually your scales can be much faster and you can hear every single note that you play because you've got the authenticity. So hopefully this is one of many reasons that you will consider and see why I am making these videos. It's because I believe in the Bass Player University. I believe in the group setting. And I hope you enjoyed this little discussion about metal and what it can do for you as a bassist. It can do a lot. You never even have to play metal ever as a live performance or in the studio. But if you mess around with it, let it challenge you, because it's guaranteed to do that. Let it challenge you. And bring it back to whatever you're doing. It may even, as the final tidbit, sometimes playing that way, that when you go to play something else, you find that you can actually play lighter and get all the sound because you're not in this whole heavy hitting mode. Thanks for hanging out. Go to my website, join my email list, check out the pricing and benefits section so you can see what the university is all about. There's some examples of the weekly progress assessments that I give, the weekly evaluations, their grades. I give you tons of words about each thing that we worked on. And we get a monthly syllabus so you can stay on track and see what's going on. Thank you again. I'll see you guys next time.